The Unwelcome Guest. David Carter stepped into the grand lobby of Galactic Haven, the most famous luxury hotel in the galaxy. His boots left small dust marks on the polished floor, and his jacket was worn out from long space travel. The place was bright, filled with golden lights and floating decorations. Alien guests in expensive clothes walked around, chatting and sipping exotic drinks. But the moment David entered, everything went silent. The guests turned to look at him, then looked away in disgust. Some whispered to each other. A few laughed. At the reception desk, an alien with 4 arms and green scaly skin watched David with a sharp, judging look. His name was Gradox, and he was the head receptionist. He sighed loudly, rolling all 4 of his yellow eyes. A human. Gradox muttered in disappointment. He didn't bother lowering his voice. What is the galaxy coming to? David ignored him and walked to the front desk. I need a room, David said, his voice calm. Gradox smirked. You? A human? In this hotel? He let out a loud fake laugh. Oh, this is good. I thought humans stayed in cheap motels, or, what do they call them? Trash stations. Aliens around the lobby chuckled. David remained silent. Gradox leaned forward. Listen, human, this hotel is for the rich, powerful, and important. Not for people like you. He looked at David's dusty clothes again and wrinkled his nose. You might scare away the real guests. David met his eyes. I just want a room. Gradox crossed his arms. Fine. But we have standards, you see. He glanced at his screen. Our cheapest room is 1,000 credits per night. Can you even afford that? David pulled out a small black card and slid it across the counter. Gradox's smirk vanished. He looked at the card. It was a high-level galactic credit card, only used by the wealthiest people in the universe. A long silence followed. Gradox coughed, trying to cover his embarrassment. He forced a smile and scanned the card. My apologies. I was only joking, of course. David didn't smile back. Just give me the room. Gradox quickly tapped on his console. Then his smirk returned. Oh dear, I'm afraid only one room is available. It's on the lowest floor, next to the trash disposal system. Not the best view, but I'm sure it's cozy. He grinned. Shall I book it for you? David knew this was a lie. A hotel this size had plenty of rooms. But he didn't argue. He simply nodded. Gradox handed him a rusty old key card. Enjoy your stay, he said mockingly. David took the key and walked away. The aliens in the lobby watched him go, shaking their heads. As David waited for the elevator, he heard a rich, blue-skinned alien couple whispering nearby. Disgusting, one of them said. I don't know why humans even bother coming here. David didn't react. He had heard worse before. He knew exactly how most aliens saw humans. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. David stepped inside, pressed the button for the lowest floor, and leaned against the wall. As the doors closed, his expression changed. His calm face turned into a small, knowing smile. Nobody in this hotel knew the truth. Nobody knew who he really was. And soon, they were all going to find out. The hidden power. The air in the lower levels of Galactic Haven was stale and cold. Unlike the grand golden halls above, these floors were dark, damp, and forgotten. The neon lights on the ceiling flickered, some barely working. The walls had scratches and rust stains, a sharp contrast to the hotel's perfect reputation. David Carter stepped into his assigned room and let out a slow breath. It was as bad as he expected. The room was small, with only a single bed, a cracked mirror, and a dusty table. The air smelled faintly of machine oil, likely from the trash disposal system nearby. The window was blocked by a metal grate, and the walls were thin enough that David could hear the pipes groaning somewhere inside them. He sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his short brown hair. He had been in worse places before. Much worse. Still, it was amusing. He owned this hotel. Every floor, every room, every credit spent here belonged to him. Yet here he was, assigned the worst space possible, all because an arrogant alien thought he was unimportant. David's fingers tapped against the bed frame as he thought. This place was falling apart. The management was careless, the staff was rude, and the guests, at least the wealthier ones, were entitled and blind. It was a disaster in disguise, and that meant it was time for a change. A taste of power. David pulled out his small black wrist communicator. A quick scan of his thumb unlocked its advanced controls. The screen lit up with a hidden menu, revealing a direct access panel to the hotel's systems. With a few simple commands, he silently activated the security feeds. Small holograms projected into the air, showing live footage from around the hotel. He saw the glowing lounges filled with the galaxy's richest guests, the casino packed with aliens gambling away fortunes, the dining halls serving exotic foods to creatures from across the stars. And then he saw the front desk. Gratox was there, laughing with other staff members. David turned up the audio. "Did you see his face?" Gratox sneered, leaning against the counter. He didn't even argue, just took the worst room like a dumb little human. The other employees laughed. One of them, a short, gray-skinned alien, shook his head. "I still don't understand why humans try to come here. They should stick to their own filthy colonies." David's jaw clenched. He didn't lose his temper. He never did. But this was exactly why he had returned. A test of management. A loud beeping noise pulled David's attention away from the holograms. It came from the hallway outside his room. Curious, he stepped out and saw a group of hotel staff struggling with a cart of supplies. One of them, a young alien in a hotel uniform, looked stressed. David approached. "Need a hand?" The alien glanced at him, eyes filled with irritation. "No," he snapped. "We don't need human help." David shrugged and leaned against the wall, watching as they accidentally knocked over a crate of expensive glassware. The crash echoed through the hallway. The alien workers froze. Their leader, a bulky creature with 2 horns, cursed loudly. "Do you know how much those cost? If management finds out, we're finished." David tilted his head. "Or you could just replace them before anyone notices." The young alien glared at him. "And where exactly do we get replacements, genius?" David smiled. "Storage room, section D4, 3rd shelf on the left. Full set of backup glassware." The workers blinked in confusion. How do you know that?" the horned one asked. David simply turned and walked away without answering. As he entered the elevator, he could hear them whispering. "Who the hell is that human?" A new enemy. Back at the front desk, Gratox was still in a good mood. He leaned against the counter, telling another joke at David's expense, when suddenly, a deep robotic voice spoke over the hotel's announcement system. "AT in Tyone. Emergency inspection in Piro Juries. All STAFF. REPORT to your stations ANMNEDA HELI." Gratox stiffened. "What? Who ordered an inspection? No one told me about this." All around the lobby, employees rushed to their places. Panic spread among the corrupt staff members. An inspection meant trouble, especially if someone looked too closely at their work. David stepped out of the elevator just in time to see the chaos unfold. He smiled to himself. Let the games begin. The big reveal. A deep silence fell over the grand lobby of Galactic Haven. The robotic voice of the hotel's announcement system had shaken every staff member to their core. "AT in Tyone. Emergency inspection in Piro Juries. All STAFF REPORT to your stations MMEDLA HELI." Gratox, the arrogant 4-armed receptionist, froze in place. His yellow eyes darted around in confusion. "Inspection," he hissed. "Who authorized an inspection?" The other employees looked equally panicked. Inspections in Galactic Haven were rare. They only happened when something went terribly wrong, like financial fraud, system failures, or, worse, a complaint from a VIP guest. Gratox took a shaky breath and forced himself to calm down. He had been working here for years. Nothing ever truly happened to the senior staff. But still, something about this felt different. The doors to the staff rooms burst open, and a tall, red-scaled alien wearing a sharp business suit stormed out. Manager Xyros. Xyros was second in command of the hotel, right under the mysterious owner, a person no one had seen in years. His 6 glowing eyes scanned the room with deadly focus. His presence alone made the weaker employees shrink back. "Who ordered this?" Xyros growled. A robotic voice answered from the speakers. "Emergency inspection initiated by high-level authority. Full compliance required." Gratox's stomach twisted. High-level authority. What did that mean? Then, before he could question it further, the elevator at the far end of the lobby dinged softly. All eyes turned toward it. The doors slid open, and out stepped David Carter. Whispers and shock. David walked through the lobby calmly, hands in his pockets. His boots clicked against the shining floor. The aliens around him stared in confusion. "What is that human doing here?" Someone whispered. "Wait, isn't that the guy Gratox insulted earlier?" Another muttered. Gratox's smug grin disappeared. He felt a strange chill crawl up his spine. David moved past the front desk, his gaze sharp as he looked around the hotel lobby like he was inspecting it himself. His expression was unreadable. Finally, he stopped in front of Manager Xyros. A strange moment passed between them. And then Xyros did something that made the entire room go dead silent. He bowed, deeply, respectfully, to the human. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Gratox's mouth fell open. What? What is happening?" Xyros straightened, his cold eyes narrowing. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice level but cautious, "it is unexpected to see you here." Gratox's mind raced. "Mr. Carter? No, that wasn't possible. That name, that was the name off." David turned slightly and finally looked at Gratox. The human smiled. "Gratox," he said pleasantly, "you seem nervous." Gratox took a step back. You. Who are you?" David tilted his head. "Oh, you don't recognize me." He chuckled. "That's interesting, considering you work for me." A long, heavy silence followed. David took another step forward. "Let me introduce myself properly," he said, his voice clear, steady, and filled with quiet authority. "My name is David Carter, and I'm the owner of Galactic Haven." The fall of Gratox. Gratox felt his entire world collapse. His breathing quickened. His 4 hands gripped the counter so hard his claws dug into the polished surface. He couldn't speak. David Carter. The David Carter. The real owner of Galactic Haven. Gratox had spent the entire day insulting, mocking, and humiliating the one person who had the power to fire him on the spot. David took his time, watching Gratox's horrified expression. He could see the moment realization hit. It was delicious. David turned to Manager Xyros. "Xyros," he said casually, "remind me, what's the policy on staff members who mistreat guests?" Xyros didn't hesitate. "Immediate termination, sir." The room tensed. Gratox's knees nearly gave out. Wait. You can't." Gratox stammered, panic creeping into his voice. This is some kind of joke, right? You're just." David raised a hand. And just like that, Gratox shut up. "This isn't a joke," David said, his voice low but firm. "You insulted a guest. You judged someone based on appearance. You treated a paying customer like garbage." He took a slow step forward. "And that's not just a failure in hospitality, Gratox. That's a failure in character." Gratox's legs trembled. "You're fired." The words hit like a meteor strike. "No," Grat Ox whispered in shock. "Security," David said, turning slightly. "Please escort Mr. Grat Ox off the property. He is no longer welcome here." Two towering robotic security guards immediately approached. Grat Ox panicked. "Wait, please. I didn't know. I was just..." The guards grabbed his arms. "No, please. Give me an NOTER chance," Grat Ox shouted, struggling uselessly. I can do better. David sighed. "You had your chance, and you threw it away." Grat Ox was dragged across the lobby, screaming. The guests and staff watched in stunned silence. For the first time in his life, Grat Ox felt small. The grand doors slid open, and with one final pathetic wail, he was thrown out of Galactic Haven. "The new order begins." David turned back to the staff, who still looked too stunned to move. He gave them a small, easy smile. "Now then," he said, "let's talk about how we're going to fix this place." The room remained silent. And then, slowly, one of the staff members stepped forward. A young alien, a receptionist who had worked under Grat Ox, nervously raised his hand. "Sir," he said quietly, "does this mean the rules are changing?" David's smile widened slightly. "Oh yes," he said. "Everything is about to change." The hotel purge. The silence in the grand lobby of Galactic Haven felt heavier than the artificial gravity keeping the station in place. David Carter stood in the center, his presence commanding attention, even without raising his voice. He had fired Grat Ox without hesitation. The arrogant receptionist had been thrown out like trash, and now the entire staff was staring at their new reality. For years, they had worked under the illusion that their careless, corrupt ways would go unnoticed. The owner was just a name, a distant figure who never interfered. They could get away with anything: rudeness, overcharging, cutting corners, treating humans like dirt, because no one ever held them accountable. But today, the illusion had shattered. The owner was here, and he was watching everything. David let the silence stretch a little longer. Let them feel the weight of what had just happened. Then, in a calm voice, he said, "This hotel is a mess." The staff flinched as if he had slapped them. The gathering of the managers. A tense emergency meeting was called. Every department head, every high-ranking manager, and every important staff member gathered in the hotel's massive executive conference hall, a room most employees had never even stepped into. The walls were lined with holographic displays showing performance statistics, guest reviews, and financial reports. David sat at the head of the long metallic table. The hotel managers sat stiffly in their chairs, their eyes darting between each other, waiting to see how bad things were about to get. To his right, Manager Xyros, the second in command, remained unreadable, his 6 glowing eyes carefully studying David. To his left, Chief of Security Malkor, a massive 4-armed beast with cybernetic implants, sat with his arms crossed, waiting to see if this human owner had the strength to back up his words. And across from them, the heads of finance, housekeeping, customer relations, and food service looked nervous and pale. David tapped his fingers on the table, watching them. Finally, he leaned forward. "I want answers," he said. "How did this hotel become so rotten?" The room tensed. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Then, slowly, the head of customer relations, a frail, insect-like alien named Zevith, cleared her throat. "Sir, with all due respect, Galactic Haven is still considered the finest hotel in the galaxy. Our profits have been stable and..." David cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Profit doesn't mean success," he said. "And you know it." Zevith shrank in her seat. David gestured to the holographic display, where a series of numbers flickered in bright red. Guest complaints had skyrocketed. VIP satisfaction had dropped by 28% in the last cycle. Service speed was below industry standards. Employee theft had tripled in the past 6 months. The reports didn't lie. David turned back to the group. "You've been running this place like a corrupt empire." His voice was calm, but each word carried steel. "You overcharge guests. You treat lower-class travelers like garbage. You ignore maintenance issues. You let laziness and greed fester in the ranks. And worst of all," David's blue eyes swept across the room, "you forgot what real service means." A long silence followed. Then, finally, Viro spoke. His voice was careful, measured. "What do you intend to do, sir?" David leaned back, a small dangerous smile on his face. "I intend to clean house." The mass firings begin. The next 48 hours shook Galactic Haven to its core. David didn't just fire Gratox. He purged every corrupt, incompetent, or abusive staff member. The food service director, who had been selling expired ingredients to cut costs, fired. The head of maintenance, who had ignored guest complaints and pocketed repair funds, gone. The VIP concierge team, who only cared about bribes, replaced. Every security officer who had taken part in intimidation, racial discrimination, or illegal activities, escorted out of the building by armed guards. David left no room for negotiation. If they had been part of the problem, they were out. The hotel corridors were filled with the sounds of outraged employees protesting, crying, or begging for second chances. David didn't give them any. The new rules of Galactic Haven. Once the purge was complete, David gathered the remaining staff, those who had survived the cuts, those who had done their jobs properly but had been too afraid to speak up. They stood nervously in the massive atrium, waiting to hear what would happen next. David stepped up onto the central stage, holding a datapad in his hand. "Listen well," he said, "because this is how things are going to work from now on." A hush fell over the crowd. "From this moment forward, Galactic Haven will be a hotel worthy of its name. Not just for the rich, not just for the elite, but for anyone who walks through those doors." Some employees shifted uneasily. They weren't used to treating all guests as equals. David continued, "If you serve here, you will be the best. The best chefs, the best guards, the best receptionists, the best housekeeping team, the best in the galaxy. If you cannot meet that standard, then leave now." Silence. Then, slowly, the employees began nodding. Some hesitated, but many looked hopeful. David held up the datapad. "New rules. All guests, regardless of species or wealth, will be treated with respect. Any form of bribery, discrimination, or illegal activity will be met with immediate termination. Every employee will be trained to meet elite service standards. Anyone caught mistreating guests will be personally dealt with by me." He smiled coldly. "And I think you all know what happens to people who disappoint me." A collective shiver ran through the crowd. David let the words settle. Then he softened slightly. "Those of you who stayed, you have a choice." His voice was firm but fair. "Help me make Galactic Haven the greatest hotel in the universe, or leave." A moment of uncertainty. Then, one by one, employees stepped forward and pledged loyalty. David smiled. The new order had begun. Revenge of the fired staff. Galactic Haven had never experienced a shakeup like this before. The hotel, once a kingdom of unchecked corruption, was now being rebuilt from the ground up. David Carter, the true owner, had made his move. He had purged the incompetent, the arrogant, and the corrupt. He had rewritten the rules, demanding excellence, fairness, and efficiency. For the remaining employees, it was a new era. Some feared the change. Others welcomed it. But everyone knew one thing for certain. David was not a man to be challenged. But outside the hotel, the ones he had fired weren't going to leave quietly. The gathering in the underbelly. Far below the shining floors of Galactic Haven, in the dark corners of the space station, a secret meeting was taking place. In a dimly lit bar called the Rusted Fang, Gratox sat at a round table, nursing a glass of burning blue liquor. His claws dug into the surface, his 4 eyes twitching in rage. He had been humiliated, publicly thrown out like garbage, and by a human. A group of former staff members surrounded him. The ones who had been fired, cast aside, stripped of their cushy positions. The ex-head of VIP services, a slimy amphibian named Jorvex, slammed his fist against the table. That human ruined everything. The customers don't even care that we're gone, spat Lurka, a 3-eyed alien who had once controlled the hotel's security department. They're happy. Happy, as if they weren't supposed to worship us. Gratox snarled. It's only temporary. That human thinks he's won, but he doesn't know how things really work in this sector. The others leaned in, intrigued. What do you mean? Asked a former finance officer. Gratox's eyes gleamed with hatred. I mean, it's time we remind Mr. Carter that power doesn't come from fancy titles. He finished his drink in one gulp. It comes from control, and we're about to take it back. Sabotage begins. The first signs of trouble appeared the next day. The hotel's primary energy core suffered a mysterious glitch. Power flickered across the casino floors. The neon signs in the shopping district fizzled out. The luxury suites lost climate control, leaving wealthy guests sweating in discomfort. David sat in his private office, reviewing reports, when manager Xyros rushed in. Sir, we have a problem, Cairo said, his usual calm voice tinged with urgency. David looked up. What kind of problem? Xyros handed him a datapad. Multiple failures across the hotel. Security systems were disabled for 2 full minutes last night. Several VIP reservations were mysteriously deleted, and someone tampered with the kitchen inventory. Half the food stock is missing. David's eyes darkened. This wasn't coincidence. It was deliberate. They're testing us, David murmured, seeing how far they can push before I react. Xyros hesitated. You think the fired staff? I know it's them. David's fingers tapped the desk. They're trying to make it look like I can't run this place. Xyros frowned. Should I increase security? David shook his head. No, not yet. Let them believe we're scrambling. They want us to panic. Let's give them false confidence. Xyros nodded slowly. And then David leaned forward, a cold smirk forming. We take them down. The plan unfolds. Over the next 2 days, the sabotage escalated. A shipment of luxury Nebula wine was stolen, leaving VIPs furious. The hotel's reservation system suffered sudden cancellations, seemingly by accident. Housekeeping discovered dozens of damaged rooms, trashed by unknown guests. The fired employees were hitting Galactic Haven from the shadows, trying to cause chaos. And David let them. He let them believe they were winning, until the night of the Grand Solar Ball. The trap is set. The Grand Solar Ball was the biggest event of the cycle. The richest, most powerful beings in the sector gathered in Galactic Haven's massive ballroom, a breathtaking dome filled with floating chandeliers and golden architecture. Security was tighter than ever. The fired employees thought they had crippled the hotel, but everything looked perfect. David stood at the top of the grand staircase, watching the guests arrive in glittering attire. Hyros stood beside him. They're here, Hyros said quietly. The saboteurs. David's smirk was ruthless. Good. The betrayal revealed. As the ball reached its peak, a massive explosion rocked the lower levels. Smoke filled the air. Panic spread among the guests. It was exactly what the saboteurs wanted. Gratox and his crew, wearing stolen security uniforms, rushed into the ballroom. This hotel is under new management, Gratox roared, gripping a stolen plasma pistol. Everyone remains calm, and no one gets hurt. Gasps filled the room. Some guests screamed. But David laughed. Gratox's smug expression faltered. What's so funny? David casually stepped forward. I was waiting for you. The second the words left his mouth, Hidden security turrets emerged from the ceiling. Energy barriers locked the exits. Gratox and his team froze. David's voice was smooth as steel. "You walked into my trap." The final fall. Security forces, led by Malker, burst into the room. Within moments, Gratox and his team were overwhelmed. Some tried to fight. Others ran. None escaped. Gratox struggled, but David approached him, shaking his head. "This was your last mistake," David said. "You could have left. You could have moved on." Gratox's eyes burned with hatred. "You think you've won?" He spat. David smiled. "I don't think. I know." With a nod, he signaled the guards. And with that, Gratox was dragged away, defeated once again. The aftermath. Galactic Haven was safe once more. The sabotage was over. Order had been restored. And now, the galaxy knew. David Carter wasn't just some human. He was a force to be reckoned with. As he stood in the grand ballroom, watching the guests slowly recover, Tyros approached. "What now?" the manager asked. David smiled. "Now." He looked out at the stars. "Now, we rebuild." The final showdown. Galactic Haven was no longer just a hotel. It was a battlefield. The rebellion of the fired staff had been crushed. Their leader, Gratox, dragged away in disgrace. The sabotage attempts had failed, and David Carter had proven that he wasn't just the owner. He was the force behind every inch of this hotel. But something still didn't sit right. David stood in his personal suite, high above the hotel, staring out at the massive void of space through the panoramic windows. The view was breathtaking. Stars stretched endlessly, space freighters drifting in the distance, and the glowing lights of the station's many districts shining like distant cities. But his mind wasn't on the view. It was on a simple question. Was this truly over? The last message. A soft chime echoed in his suite. Incoming message. David tapped his communicator, and a distorted voice filled the room. "You think you've won, human." David's eyes narrowed. He didn't recognize the voice, but something about it sent a prickle of warning down his spine. Galactic Haven is a toy, a nice little playground for the rich. But you forget, playgrounds can burn. David's jaw tightened. He tapped the communicator, trying to trace the signal, but it was already disappearing. Whoever had sent this message was smart, careful, and still out there. His instincts screamed. The real threat hadn't even begun. The smuggler's truth. David didn't believe in luck. He believed in patterns, intelligence, and reading between the lines. And right now, all the patterns pointed to something bigger than just a group of angry ex-employees. There was another player in the game, and he needed answers. That's why, later that night, he found himself walking into a dark storage bay, deep in the lower sectors of the station. The air was thick with oil and the smell of old metal. It was a place where deals were made quietly, and secrets were worth more than money. A figure stood near a pile of stolen cargo, smoking something that burned with a faint blue glow. The moment they saw David, they let out a low whistle. Well, the smuggler muttered. "The great David Carter. Didn't think I'd ever see you down here." David crossed his arms. "You owe me a favor, Borlax." The smuggler, a scruffy-looking insectoid with compound eyes, grinned. "Do I? I don't remember signing a contract." David tossed a small metal cube at him. The smuggler caught it, and the moment he looked at it, his mandibles clicked in frustration. A security recording. Proof that Borlax had been smuggling illegal goods through the station for months. "Ah," Borlax muttered. "That favor." David stepped closer. "Tell me everything you know about the people backing Gratox." Borlax hesitated. "That's dangerous knowledge." David's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "So is crossing me." The smuggler exhaled sharply. Then, finally, he said two words that changed everything. The Black Nova. The hidden enemy. The moment Borlax spoke the name, David felt a cold certainty settle into his bones. The Black Nova Syndicate, a ruthless criminal empire. They operated in the shadows, pulling strings across entire planets, running illegal markets, weapons trades, and assassinations. If they were involved, that meant Grat Ox's rebellion hadn't just been an act of revenge. It was a distraction. David's mind raced. What had they been planning? What was their real goal? Borlax seemed to read his thoughts. "You're too late, Carter. They didn't just want to mess with your hotel. They wanted to own it." David's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" The smuggler's mandibles twitched. "The attack on the Grand Solar Ball. The sabotage. That was just the first phase. While you were cleaning house." He paused, shaking his head. They were already inside. The betrayal from within. David didn't hesitate. He stormed out of the storage bay, his communicator already sending out priority alerts. Xyros. Emergency meeting. Now. Within minutes, he was back in his office, surrounded by his top staff. Tyros. Malker. The new head of security. The best of the best. "Something's wrong," David said, his voice tight. "We've been looking at this all wrong. The sabotage. The attacks. It wasn't about hurting the hotel. It was about getting inside." Xyros frowned. "Inside? Inside what?" David tapped his datapad, pulling up a holographic projection of Galactic Haven's infrastructure. "This hotel isn't just a hotel," he said. "It sits on the central nexus of this entire station. It has connections to banking networks, security feeds, corporate dealings. If someone were to gain control of its systems," Malker's massive frame stiffened, "they could blackmail half the elite class in this sector." A silence fell over the room. David's grip on the datapad tightened. "They weren't trying to destroy Galactic Haven," he said. "They were trying to steal it. The final attack." Suddenly, a high-pitched alarm blared through the speakers. The lights flickered. The emergency red glow bathed the room. "Unauthorized access detected. Security lockdown engaged." David's stomach dropped. It was happening. "They're making their move," he said, already heading for the door. "They're hacking into the core systems." Tyros, Malker, and the rest of the team followed. The halls of the hotel were chaos. Doors locking, lights flashing, guests panicking. David raced toward the command center. If he didn't stop this now, Galactic Haven would no longer belong to him. It would belong to the Black Nova Syndicate. The final showdown. David burst into the control center, where a masked figure stood at the main terminal, fingers moving in a blur over the holographic controls. The moment the intruder saw David, they grinned beneath their mask. "You're too late, Carter." David pulled out his pulse pistol. "Try me." The best hotel in the galaxy. The control center of Galactic Haven was in chaos. Warning sirens blared, emergency lights flickered red, and the holographic security grid displayed error after error as an unknown force tried to take over the hotel's core systems. David Carter stood at the doorway, pulse pistol raised. His cold blue eyes locked onto the masked figure at the terminal, the one trying to steal his hotel from under his nose. The masked hacker chuckled. "You're too late, Carter. Galactic Haven belongs to the Black Nova Syndicate now." David tilted his head slightly. "That's so." The hacker tapped a final command on the console. "System override initiated. Hotel control transfer in progress." A countdown appeared on the main screen. 2 minutes until full control transfer. David didn't hesitate. He fired. A bright blue pulse blast struck the console, sending sparks flying. The masked hacker cursed and leaped back, barely dodging the next shot. David moved fast. He vaulted over a desk, grabbing the hacker by the collar and slamming them against the wall. "You think you can take what's mine?" David hissed. The hacker grinned under their mask. "It was never yours to begin with." A blade shot out of their sleeve. David dodged just in time. The knife sliced the edge of his jacket, but he spun and drove his elbow into the hacker's ribs. They stumbled, gasping, but before David could finish them, the screen flashed again. System override. 85% complete. David's eyes darkened. He had less than a minute before everything, his hotel, his accounts, his entire empire, belonged to the Black Nova Syndicate. And that was not going to happen. The mastermind revealed. Before David could act, the main screen changed. A new face appeared. A dark-skinned alien with piercing silver eyes, wearing a sleek black suit. He sat in a high-backed chair, completely at ease, his fingers steepled. "Ah, Mr. Carter," the alien said smoothly. "Finally, we meet." David's grip on his gun tightened. He knew that face. Sereth Fox, the real leader of the Black Nova Syndicate. "I have to admit," Sereth continued, his voice like silk, "I underestimated you. I thought you were just a businessman with good instincts. But you're something more." David smirked. "Flattery won't stop me from ruining your plans." Sereth chuckled. "Oh, I don't think you can stop me. In just 30 seconds, the Black Nova Syndicate will own Galactic Haven. You, my dear Carter, will be nothing more than a man standing in a building that no longer belongs to him." David glanced at the screen. System override. 92% complete. Time left. 30 seconds. David exhaled slowly. Then he said, "You forgot something, Sereth." Sereth raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" David smiled. "I built this hotel." He raised his wrist communicator and tapped a single command. The hotel's secret weapon. For years, Galactic Haven had been his greatest creation. And like any great creation, it had hidden failsafes. David's command activated the most powerful one. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the control room. "Emergency lockdown protocol activated. System override canceled." The countdown on the screen froze at 98%. Sereth's smirk vanished. David holstered his gun and dusted off his jacket. "I don't lose my property to criminals, Sereth." The silver-eyed alien leaned forward, his expression darkening. "Clever," he admitted. "But this isn't over." The screen flickered off. The hacker beside David staggered back, clutching their ribs. "You don't know what you just did," they whispered. David sighed. "I stopped a bunch of idiots from stealing my hotel. That's what I did." Before the hacker could run, David grabbed them by the wrist and hit his communicator. "Security, I have someone who needs a proper escort to the nearest cell." The syndicate falls. By the time David stepped back into the grand lobby of Galactic Haven, security forces were already rounding up the last of the infiltrators. Manager Xyros and Chief of Security Malker stood waiting for him. Xyros crossed his arms. "All infiltrators accounted for. Their connections have been traced, and we've already shut down every backdoor they installed into the system." Malker cracked his massive knuckles. "Want me to send a message to the rest of the Black Nova Syndicate?" David smirked. "No need. Sereth Fox already got the message." Malker let out a low chuckle. "Pity. I would have enjoyed breaking a few more bones." David stepped forward and looked around the lobby. The guests, the workers, even the newly trained staff, they were all watching. For the first time in a long time, they weren't afraid. They trusted him. And that meant something. A new beginning. The next morning, Galactic Haven shined like never before. The hotel had been restored. The new staff, trained under David's strict new rules, had already begun creating a legendary reputation. People across the galaxy heard about what had happened, about the human owner who took on a crime syndicate, purged corruption, and turned his hotel into something more than just a place to stay. It was now a symbol, a place where any species could find hospitality, safety, and luxury, as long as they followed the rules. At the top of the hotel, in his private suite, David Carter watched the stars. Thyros walked in. "It's done. The syndicate won't be coming back. Galactic Haven is yours, fully secure." David nodded. "Good." Thyros hesitated. And what now? David Carter smiled, picking up a datapad filled with expansion plans. Oh, we're just getting started, he said. Galactic Haven wasn't just the best hotel in the galaxy anymore. It was the first of many.